The gunshot echoed through the diner at exactly 11:47 p.m. Glass shattered. A woman screamed. And in that split second, everything Dominic Russo had spent 15 years building came crashing down around a plate of cold apple pie. He'd walked into Rosie's diner like he did every Tuesday night for the past 3 months. Same corner booth. Same black coffee, no sugar. Same waitress with tired eyes who never asked questions. The routine was his escape from the blood and bullets that defined his world as Chicago's most feared crime lord. Tonight, 2 masked men burst through the door, guns raised, shouting demands nobody could understand through their panic. Dominic's hand moved to the Glock hidden beneath his jacket, but he stopped when he saw her. The waitress, Aria Bennett, 26 years old with dark circles under her green eyes and flour stains on her apron, standing between the gunmen and a booth where a little girl sat frozen with fear. "Get out of the way," one gunman snarled, waving his weapon at Aria. She didn't move. Her hands were shaking so hard Dominic could see it from across the room, but her feet stayed, planted like roots in concrete. "There's a child," Aria said, her voice cracking. "Just take the money and leave, please." The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger. Dominic moved faster than thought. 3 shots. Clean. Precise. Both gunmen dropped before they could react, and the third bullet shattered the security camera in the corner, erasing evidence of what had just happened. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, the smell of gunpowder mixed with coffee and grease. Aria stood there, trembling, staring at the bodies on the checkered floor. Then she looked at Dominic, and he saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. Not fear of him, but recognition that he'd just saved her life. "Thank you," she whispered. Dominic holstered his gun and walked toward the door. He couldn't stay. The police would arrive soon, and his face couldn't be connected to this scene. But when he reached the entrance, he turned back. "Forget you saw me," he said quietly. "Forget everything about tonight." Then he disappeared into the Chicago darkness, leaving behind a waitress who would never forget anything at all. 3 days later, Dominic's world exploded. His accountant, the man he'd trusted with every financial secret of his empire, had been working for the FBI. $50 million vanished overnight, transferred to offshore accounts Dominic couldn't touch. Bank accounts frozen. Safe houses raided. His entire operation crippled in less than 48 hours. Marco Santos, his second in command, burst into his penthouse office with news that made his blood run cold. "The Volkov family knows you're vulnerable," Marco said, his scarred face grim. "They're moving tonight. Every rival crew in Chicago is circling like sharks." Dominic stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city he'd controlled for 15 years. The empire he'd built from nothing was collapsing, and he had 72 hours before the Volkovs made their move to eliminate him permanently. "How much cash do we have?" Dominic asked. 300,000. That's it. Everything else is frozen or gone. $300,000. Once, Dominic could have lost that amount in a single poker game and laughed about it. Now it was all that stood between him and destruction. "Pull everyone back to the warehouse district," Dominic ordered. "We consolidate, we protect what we have left, and we figure out who betrayed us." But that night, as Dominic sat alone in his penthouse with a loaded gun on the desk, he found his thoughts drifting back to the diner, to green eyes and flour-stained aprons, to a woman who'd been willing to die for a stranger's child. He didn't know why he went back to Rosie's diner 2 nights later. Maybe because it was the last place in Chicago where nobody looked at him like a monster. Maybe because he needed to see something good before the Volkovs put a bullet in his head. Aria was there, wiping down tables in the empty diner at midnight. She looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and their eyes met. "You came back," she said softly. "I shouldn't have." She poured coffee without being asked, and set it in front of him at the counter. Her hands were steadier now, but he could see the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. "The police asked questions," Arya said, sitting across from him. "I told them I didn't see anything. The security camera was broken, and I was too scared to remember faces." "Smart." "No, terrified." She wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. "But you saved my life. You saved that little girl. I wasn't going to repay that by putting you in prison." Dominic studied her face. Most people who knew what he was ran in the opposite direction. Arya just sat there, looking at him like he was human. "You don't know who I am," he said. "Dominic Russo, owner of half the real estate in the South Loop, connected to every major construction project in Chicago, and according to the rumors, the head of the largest crime family in the Midwest." His jaw tightened. "If you know that, why are you still sitting here?" "Because 3 nights ago, you had every reason to let those men shoot me and walk away clean. But you didn't." Arya leaned forward slightly. "That tells me there's more to you than the rumors say." For the first time in 15 years, Dominic felt something crack inside the armor he'd built around himself. This woman, this tired waitress with green eyes and a stubborn streak, was looking at him like he was worth saving. "I'm in trouble," he heard himself say, words he'd never spoken to anyone. "Real trouble, and I don't know how to fix it." Arya was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. Her fingers were rough from years of hard work, warm against his skin. "Sometimes the answer isn't fixing it alone," she said quietly. "Sometimes you need help." Dominic pulled his hand back, but the warmth of her touch lingered. He stood up, threw cash on the counter for coffee he hadn't drunk, and headed for the door. "Stay away from me," he said without looking back. "People around me don't survive long." But even as he said it, he knew he'd be back. Because Arya Bennett had done something nobody else in Chicago could. She'd made him feel human again. The next day, everything got worse. The Volkovs hit one of Dominic's last remaining shipments, killing 3 of his men and sending a message. They wanted him dead, wanted his territory, wanted to erase the Russo name from Chicago's underworld completely. Dominic sat in the warehouse with Marco and the handful of men still loyal to him, planning their defense. They were outnumbered 5-1. The smart play was to run, disappear, start over somewhere else. But Dominic Russo had never run from anything in his life. "We hit them first," he said, spreading a map across the table. "Tomorrow night, the Volkov family is moving a shipment through the port. We take it, we hurt them, and we buy ourselves time." "With what army?" Marco demanded. "We've got 12 guys, Dominic, they've got 60. "Then we fight smarter." Dominic's finger traced a route on the map. "We don't need to win. We just need to survive long enough to expose who betrayed us and get our money back." That night, unable to sleep, Dominic found himself back at the diner. It was 2 in the morning, and Arya was there again, this time sitting in a booth with a calculator and a pile of bills spread in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and something like relief crossed her face. "Rough night?" she asked. "Something like that." Arya gathered her papers quickly, but not before Dominic saw the final notice stamps on several envelopes. "Past due. Overdue. Final warning." "You're in trouble too," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Medical bills. My daughter Emma, she's 4 years old and has leukemia. The treatment costs more than I make in 3 years. I work 3 jobs and it's still not enough." Her voice cracked. "The hospital says if I can't pay by Friday, they'll stop her chemotherapy." Dominic felt something cold settle in his chest. Here was this woman, working herself to death for a child, just like she'd been willing to die for a stranger's child 3 nights ago. "How much do you need?" he asked. $270,000. Arya's laugh was bitter. Might as well be 2 million. I'll never have that kind of money. Dominic reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was everything he had left. 300,000 in cash, the last remnants of his empire, the money that was supposed to keep him alive through the war with the Volkovs. He pushed it across the table. Arya stared at it like he'd placed a live grenade in front of her. What is that? Payment for the coffee, Dominic said quietly, and for looking at me like I'm not a monster. I can't take this, her voice shook. This is everything you have. I heard the rumors. I know you're in trouble. Your daughter needs it more than I do. Why? Arya's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Dominic stood up. He couldn't explain it, couldn't put into words why this woman and her sick daughter mattered more to him than his own survival. He just knew that for the first time in 15 years, doing the right thing felt more important than staying alive. Because someone should, he said simply. Take care of your daughter. He walked toward the door, expecting never to see Arya Bennett again. Expecting to die tomorrow night when he hit the Volkovs with 12 men against 60. At least he'd die knowing he'd saved one innocent life. Wait, Arya's voice stopped him at the door. She was standing now, the envelope clutched in her hands, tears streaming down her face. You saved my life once. Let me save yours. There's nothing you can do. Yes, there is. She walked toward him with fierce determination in her eyes. You need money, right? To fight back, to survive. I know someone who might help. My uncle, Patrick Bennett. He owns a chain of pawn shops, but he also deals in information. Things the regular world doesn't see. Dominic studied her face. Your uncle is connected. Not like you, but he knows people, hears things, and he owes me big. Arya's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Let me help you the way you helped me. For the second time in his life, Dominic Russo made a decision based on something other than survival. He nodded. Okay. Patrick Bennett's pawn shop sat in a neighborhood where police cars didn't patrol after dark. Dominic walked in with Arya at his side, and an old man with silver hair looked up from behind bulletproof glass. Arya, Patrick's face lit up, then darkened when he saw Dominic. Who's this? Someone who needs help, Arya said firmly. And you're going to give it to him, Uncle Patrick, because he just gave me $270,000 to save Emma's life. Patrick's eyes widened. He looked at Dominic with new respect and new fear. You're Russo, the crime boss. I am. And you're in trouble. I am. Patrick was silent for a long moment. Then he pressed a button and a door buzzed open behind the counter. Come to the back, both of you. In a cramped office that smelled of cigars and old paper, Patrick pulled out a laptop and started typing. I hear things, he said quietly. Things people don't think matter, like which FBI agent is having an affair with his partner's wife, which accountant gambles more than he earns, which crime boss is about to get stabbed in the back by his own second-in-command. Dominic felt his blood turn to ice. What? Marco Santos. Patrick turned the laptop around, showing surveillance photos of Marco meeting with Alexei Volkov. He's been working with the Volkovs for 6 months. He set up your accountant, helped them freeze your assets. Tomorrow night, when you hit the port, he's going to make sure you walk into an ambush. The betrayal hit Dominic like a bullet to the chest. Marco had been with him for 10 years, brothers in blood and business. And he'd sold him out for what? Territory, money, power. Why? Dominic's voice was hoarse. Why would he do this? Because the Volkovs promised him your empire, Patrick said quietly. They promised to make him the new king of Chicago once you're dead. Arya reached over and took Dominic's hand. She didn't say anything, just held on while his world shattered into pieces around him. How much do you want for this information? Dominic finally asked. Patrick shook his head. I don't want your money, Russo. My niece says you're a good man underneath all the violence. That's enough for me, but I want you to promise me something." "What?" "When this is over, when you've dealt with the Volkovs and Marco, you walk away. You get out of this life before it kills you." Patrick looked at Arya with sad eyes. "Because my niece looks at you like you matter, and Emma's going to need a father figure who'll be around long enough to see her grow up." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Walk away. Leave the only life he'd ever known. Give up power, respect, fear. Dominic looked at Arya, at green eyes that saw past the monster to something worth saving, and he made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "If I survive tomorrow night," he said quietly, "I'll walk away." The port was dark and cold, wind whipping off Lake Michigan as Dominic stood with his 12 men, waiting. Marco was beside him, playing the role of loyal second perfectly, not knowing that Dominic knew the truth. "They should be here soon," Marco said, checking his watch. "The Volkov shipment. We hit fast, take what we can, disappear before reinforcements arrive." Dominic nodded, but his hand was already moving toward his gun. Around them, hidden in the shadows, were 30 men Patrick had called in. Not criminals, but private security contractors who owed the old man favors. Men with military training who didn't ask questions when money was good. "Marco," Dominic said quietly, "how long have we known each other?" 10 years, boss. Why?" "Because I want to give you one chance. One chance to tell me the truth before this goes bad." Marco's hand moved toward his gun, but he wasn't fast enough. Dominic's weapon was already pressed against his temple. "Don't," Dominic said softly. "Don't make me do this." Around them, Dominic's 12 men drew weapons, but they were confused, not sure who to point at. Then Patrick's contractors emerged from the shadows, 30 armed men creating a perimeter that made resistance impossible. "How?" Marco's voice was barely a whisper. "How did you know?" "Because someone cared enough to help me," Dominic said. "Someone who didn't owe me anything except the truth. Now I'm giving you the same chance. Where's my money?" Marco laughed, a broken sound. "You think you can get it back? It's already gone, spread across accounts you'll never find. The Volkovs paid me 20 million to destroy you, Dominic. 20 million. And it was worth every penny to watch you fall." "Why?" "Because you never saw me. Never saw anyone except yourself. I bled for you for 10 years and you treated me like hired help. The Volkovs offered me respect, power, a kingdom of my own. You offered me nothing." Dominic felt something break inside him. Not anger, but sadness for a friendship that had been an illusion from the start. "You're right," he said quietly, lowering his gun. "I never saw you, I never saw anyone, and that's on me." He turned to Patrick's men. "Take him to the FBI. Give them everything. Marco Santos in exchange for immunity for my remaining crew. They get clean slates, new lives, a chance to walk away from this." Marco stared at him in shock. "You're letting me live." "I'm letting justice handle you. That's more mercy than you gave me." Dominic turned away as Patrick's men handcuffed Marco. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry I wasn't the kind of boss worth following." The FBI raided the Volkov compound at dawn. Armed with testimony from Marco Santos and evidence from Patrick's information network, they arrested Alexei Volkov and 36 members of his organization. The war ended before it could truly begin. Dominic stood in Rosie's diner 3 days later, watching Arya pour coffee for the morning crowd. She looked up and smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "You survived," she said softly. "We both did." Arya set the coffee pot down and walked around the counter. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around him, and Dominic stood there frozen for a moment before hugging her back. She smelled like coffee and vanilla, warm and alive and real. "Thank you," Arya whispered against his chest. "Emma started treatment yesterday. The doctors say she has a real chance now, because of you." Dominic pulled back enough to look at her face. "I kept my promise. I walked away. Gave everything left of my empire to my men, set them up with legitimate businesses, clean money. I'm nobody now, just Dominic. Not Russo the crime boss, just a man." "Just a man who saved my daughter's life," Arya said, tears streaming down her face. "Just a man who gave up everything for strangers. That makes you somebody, Dominic. That makes you everything." She kissed him then, gentle and sweet, and Dominic felt the last pieces of his armor fall away. For 15 years, he'd been a monster wearing a man's face. Now, in the arms of a tired waitress with green eyes and a daughter fighting cancer, he finally became human again. 6 months later, Dominic sat in a small apartment that cost $800 a month, worlds away from his penthouse. He worked construction now, legitimate work with calloused hands and an honest paycheck. It was hard. It was humbling. It was the best thing he'd ever done. Arya was there, sitting at a small kitchen table helping Emma with her homework. The little girl's hair was growing back, soft brown curls that framed her face like a halo. The chemotherapy was working. She was going to survive. Emma looked up at Dominic with her mother's green eyes and smiled. "Dominic, can you help me with this math problem?" He sat down beside her, this child who'd never asked where he came from or who he used to be. She just accepted him as the man who made her mother laugh, who carried her on his shoulders, who read bedtime stories in a voice that used to order executions. "Sure, sweetheart, let's figure it out together." Arya watched them from across the table, and Dominic felt her hand slip into his. Warm, real, home. "I love you," she whispered so only he could hear. "I love you too." That night, after Emma was asleep and Arya was curled against him on the worn couch, Dominic thought about everything he'd lost. The power, the money, the fear, the empire that had defined him for 15 years. And he realized he'd never been richer than he was right now. Because he'd traded an empire built on blood for a family built on love. He'd exchanged a throne of fear for a place at a small kitchen table. He'd given up being a monster to become the man Arya and Emma needed. 3 years later, Dominic Russo stood in front of Rosie's diner holding Emma's hand. The little girl, now 7 years old and cancer-free, was practically vibrating with excitement. "Is it really ours?" Emma asked, staring at the diner with wide eyes. "Really ours," Dominic confirmed. He'd bought it from the retiring owner with money saved from 3 years of honest work. It would be their family business. A place where people could come for good food and better coffee, where nobody asked questions about the past. Arya stood beside him, a simple gold ring on her finger that had cost Dominic 2 months' salary. She was his wife now, officially and forever. Mrs. Bennett Russo, she'd said with a laugh when signing the papers. A combination of her past and his, proof that both of them had survived and found something better. "You know what the best part is?" Arya asked, leaning against his shoulder. "What?" "You get to pour your own coffee from now on." Dominic laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of coffee and vanilla that would forever mean home. Emma tugged on his hand. "Daddy, can we go inside? I want to see the kitchen." "Daddy," the word still caught him off guard every time. Emma had started calling him that 6 months ago, and Dominic had cried the first time he heard it. This little girl who'd fought cancer and won, who'd accepted him without question, who'd given him a reason to be better than he ever thought possible. "Yeah, sweetheart, let's go see our diner." They walked inside together, a family built from broken pieces that had somehow formed something whole. The bell above the door chimed, welcoming them home. Behind the counter, Dominic found something he hadn't seen before. A photograph in a simple frame, tucked in a corner where only staff would notice it. It showed the diner 3 years ago, the night of the shooting. You could see the corner booth where he'd sat, the spot where Arya had stood protecting a stranger's child. Beneath the photo, Arya had written a single line in her neat handwriting. Where monsters become men, and waitresses become heroes. Dominic picked up the frame and studied it, remembering the man he'd been that night. The crime boss with an empire who'd thought power was all that mattered. That man was dead now, and Dominic didn't mourn him. "What are you looking at?" Arya asked, coming up behind him. He turned and pulled her close, this woman who'd saved him without realizing it, who'd seen past the blood and bullets to the man underneath, who'd taught him that the richest people weren't the ones with the most money, but the ones with the most love. "Just remembering," Dominic said quietly. "Remembering the night I met an angel in a flower-stained apron." Arya smiled and kissed him softly. That angel met a guardian in a $5,000 suit who forgot he had a heart until a little girl needed saving. Emma called from the kitchen, asking if she could help make pancakes for their first customers tomorrow. Arya squeezed Dominic's hand once, then went to help their daughter. Dominic stood alone for a moment in the empty diner, looking at the photograph of the night that changed everything. Then he carefully placed it back on the shelf, a reminder of where they'd been and how far they'd come. Outside, Chicago's lights blazed against the night sky. Somewhere in that city, his former empire still existed in fragments. Men still fought for power and territory. The underworld still turned like it always had. But Dominic Russo was no longer part of that world. He was just a man who owned a diner with his wife, a father to a daughter who'd beaten cancer, someone who poured coffee and made pancakes and went to bed every night grateful for the ordinary, beautiful life he'd been given. The bell above the door chimed as a late-night customer walked in, an old woman with tired eyes who ordered coffee and pie. Dominic poured her drink with steady hands, hands that had once held guns and signed death warrants, now serving comfort and warmth to strangers. "Thank you, dear," the woman said with a smile. "My pleasure." And he meant it, every word, every moment, every breath of this new life that had saved him just as surely as he'd saved Arya and Emma. The richest man in Chicago wasn't the one with the biggest empire anymore. He was the one wearing a flower-stained apron, standing beside his wife and daughter, pouring coffee in a small diner where everyone was welcome. He was home. Finally, after 15 years of running, Dominic Russo was home.